The Abandoned Planning Commission at 7 o'clock on October 24th, 2024. Can we have a roll call, please?
Sure thing. Commissioner Orsi.
Here.
Commissioner Scobie.
Here.
Vice Chair Jerkowski.
Here.
Chair Starbuck.
Here.
Commissioner Norman.
Here.
Commissioner Frey.
Here.
Commissioner Pressler.
Here.
And now we welcome our new commissioner, Jan Pisari. Is that right?
Wessler.
Wrestler. All right, good.
Sounds like ER, but it's AR.
All right. Consent agenda.
I have a couple of items. 5.1 Dormy, correct. We need to correct the spelling on that. We discussed that. Thanks. And then on 8.1, Dana and I had a discussion, but I'd like to clarify my understanding. When there is any ground disturbance, the way I read your comment, is it always the city's responsibility to notify the tribe?
So the city's memorandum of understanding states that anytime there's a proposed ground disturbance and a permit is required, or it's the city doing the work, that's when we notify the tribe. The difference that we talked about was in the geologic assessment review, the applicant has to provide prior consultation. So they had to have already consulted with the tribe and provide that to us at the time that they submit for their geologic assessment review. And I will go over just in my planning department report, just a little bit more about geologic assessment reviews then, so we can just talk about what they mean and how they sort of function in relation to zoning compliance.
So for a GAR, such as the residential area up on Spyglass, it's the responsibility of that landowner to notify the tribe?
Yes, unless there's already been prior notifications, sometimes the city already has that sort of consultation on file, so we'll use that in its place.
So it could be either or, it sounds like.
Yeah, if there's a project where we don't have any notice from the tribe on file, we would require that they submit that in advance.
Okay.
There's times also that the tribe has let us know that certain projects may need to be moved around on the site. And so it's better to have that information before you do a big project in a hazard zone. And so that's why that condition is in there for those geologic assessment reviews, is that the consultation happens before it even hits our desk.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other comments? So your comments were not for a correction, you're just a clarification.
One correction, one clarification.
All right. We'll have a motion for the consent agenda with modifications.
I so move. Second.
Moved and seconded. Have a roll call. Or verbal roll call. All in favor?
Yeah, that one.
Aye.
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 And I'll abstain since I was not present.
Agreed. Motion passed. All right, we now have public comment. Anybody in the public that wishes to comment on anything that is not on the agenda, you have 5 minutes. Come to the podium, state your name and address, and proceed. Anybody on Zoom? All right. Seeing no interested parties, we'll move on to the public hearing. I now declare this public hearing open at 7:05, it looks like, PM on October 24th, 2024. This is an official public hearing before the Planning Commission of the City of Bandon for proposed changes to Titles 16 and 17 of the Bandon Municipal Code. Applicable criteria related to this action are listed in the staff report available online through the city's website and as part of tonight's meeting agenda. Please address your comments to these criteria or the criteria you believe apply to this decision. Failure to raise any issue of sufficient specificity to afford this decision-making body and the parties involved in obtaining an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal based on that issue. Official notice is hereby given that the Planning Commission consider laws, ordinances, court decisions, etc., without having them established as evidence in the hearing record. A copy of the minutes of this hearing, as well as the rules and procedures, will be available to the city offices. Staff report.
Thank you. June, can you pull up my presentation? Perfect. All right, so this is our annual code cleanup. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for us to address things in our code that we find unclear, maybe small changes that are missing that would help us use the code throughout the year. We've done a number of work sessions on this, but we're going to go through the items tonight. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, sure. Perfect. Okay. And then the next slide. Great. So I'm going to go through it. I've broken it down to the AR zone, the commercial design standards, parking, property line adjustments, Title 17 tables and reorganization, special use standards and supplementary provisions. I think I mentioned this in my cover sheet, but if not, I think the ordinance that I prepared for you tonight has the first three items, the AR zone, the commercial design standards, and parking. We've had to continue this hearing now for many months. It may be necessary that you pass those items along that we've talked about previously to the city council if there are no changes, and then we can continue to work through the other sections of the code. So don't feel like everything has to go together if there are parts of this that feel sort of untested or require more conversation. So next slide, please. The architectural review overlay zone under that's Bandon Municipal Code 17.84.030 deals with certificates of appropriateness. So anything located in the AR zone, which is mostly Old Town, and then I believe some additional areas over by Face Rock Creamery, are required to get certificates of appropriateness anytime they make any sort of exterior modification to their structure that is identified in the code. One of those changes that requires a COA is a change to the color of the structure. We do have an approved color palette and then an updated approved color palette that the Planning Commission reviewed 2 years ago, I think. And at that time, how we discussed the code changing with our type 1 versus type 2 decisions is that anything on that approved color palette is a type 1 decision, which means it's made by staff, it's clear and objective. Those have already been approved. We can send the approval out quickly. For type 2, we do notice property owners within 100 feet, and we allow for the opportunity for public comment and then appeal based on that. And that we apply or use the type 2 process for any colors that are not listed on that approved color palette. In our conversation, when we changed the code, the Planning Commission is the reviewing body for those certificates of appropriateness for colors outside of that color palette. In light of the time that it takes between when someone applies for that COA and then when they can be approved based on the Planning Commission's schedule, we got some feedback that that was taking a really long time. It feels like an easy fix to that is to make it a type 2 decision that's a planning director approval with the opportunity to appeal to the city council. There's also a provision in this code that says if at any time the planning department wants to, we can elevate a decision to the planning commission. So I say that because the color palette right now is mostly, like the same shades, those sorts of colors. If we were to get something that we as planning staff did not feel comfortable approving, we can always bring that to you, but it allows us to take some discretion in approving colors that maybe are very similar, but not quite the same shade or style as what's already been approved. And then parking, this would be a change to chapter 17.96.020, which has a table that describes the specific uses allowed in Bandon and then the number of parking spaces required for those uses. Currently, oh, did I skip over one? Sorry. Oh, okay, I'll go back. I'll go back to this one. Sorry, commercial design standards. Sorry, Bandon Municipal Code 17.94.020. This was clarifying the scope of when commercial design standards apply. Currently, the way it's written, I think is very unclear about whether or not it applies to just commercial properties along Highway 101 or all properties in the general commercial zone. We've proposed to apply it to all commercial properties or commercial development in the general commercial zone. I put a reason here. The commercial design standards help beautify Bandon and should be applied to all commercial development. So then the next one is the off-street parking and loading. So like I already went through that first part about hotels currently require 1 space per 2 guest rooms plus 1 space per 2 employees. The proposal is to require 1 space per guest room or suite plus 1 space per 2 employees. I'll put a little asterisk on that one. I think another project we could work on at some point is our parking code. What we've heard is it's really hard to provide parking spaces based on a number of employees that you don't necessarily know how many employees you have, and that number may change over time. So it's sort of a challenging criteria to figure out. So we'll keep it for now because that probably, we just want to fix this one part, but just something to keep in mind. And the reason for this change is that most people who are traveling to Bandon are likely coming by a personal vehicle. And so it makes sense to provide 1 parking space per room. I'm going to stop there for questions before I keep going to the next items. Any questions? Okay, no surprises there. On that one, we've gone through that one quite a few times. So the next one would be Title 16, which is property line adjustments. We've proposed adding in a few additional approval standards because what we found in processing property line adjustments, we're probably allowing some changes that we don't want to make. One of them, like an example recently, was that there were 2 lots that were facing an alley that had a sewer. The person wanted to reorient them to face a street where 1 lot then didn't have access to the sewer. They agreed to provide an easement to that property that from the property that abutted the sewer to the next property. But I think it would be really good to have something in our code that we're not going from 2 lots that have access to utilities to a lot that doesn't. That's sort of just pushing that down the line for the person who buys that property to deal with, and it could be very expensive. So that's one of the changes. The others would be to require draft deeds as part of the submittal, just knowing then that all of the easements or anything else that would be required or proposed are included as part of the application. We've had some issues where those things don't always make it in there. And then just clarifying that property line adjustments should be only between legal lots of record and not allow any sort of nonconformity. And then disallow action if there are other approvals granted previously, like conditions of approval that would limit someone's ability to adjust property lines. And these are, again, just to sort of preserve the usefulness of lots that already exist and limit passing those issues onto future property owners or not dealing with the issue at the time that it comes across our desk. Are there any questions on that particular change? And you can also ask me questions at the end if you think of something else. Okay, so then the big sort of meaty one is the Title 17, moving our chapters into tables. So currently, each zone has its own chapter, and within that chapter, it lists the outright permitted uses, the conditional uses, the height, the setbacks, the lot coverage, and a lot of it tends to be duplicated information. The other sort of thing that's come up, and a good example happened the other day where Nikki was contacted by someone who said, I want to know where I can build, it was an RV park or something like that. And so we had to go through every chapter in the code and try to figure out where an RV park was allowed. Using it in a more reorganized format where we have a table that has all of the uses on one side and all of the zones on the other. And then an indication of whether something is not permitted, outright permitted, permitted with special standards, or a conditional use would be much helpful, I think, for the average person who doesn't know how to navigate our code. I will say that the code works really well now for when someone comes in and says, hi, I live in the R1 zone, or I have a property in the R1 zone. What can I do there? And we can continue to have informational sheets for each zone that we can hand out to people. But I think in general, the reorganization of the code will be really helpful to both us and the community members. So in addition to having tables where there is the uses on one side and the zone in the other, there's another table that describes the standards. So those would include the height and the setback. And we can go through those in a bit greater detail in just a moment once I get through this part. So the reason for that is a shorter code overall. Information is sort of more centralized into one location, and the tables provide references to other code provisions that might apply. And then it would be easy to compare the zones and see what's missing. And that's a tool for planning commissioners that we can go through in just a minute. Any questions on the table reorganization? Okay.
So,
Oh.
so the table, 'cause it sounds like you guys have practiced with this a little bit. The table makes it easier and faster to find material for the staff.
That's right. I think it's also a little bit faster for people in the community. So when they come in and they ask questions like, where can I build this particular thing? That's where I've actually sent it to people as this is still draft, but I use it as a cheat sheet to figure out where things are allowed or not allowed, or what the height would be in one zone versus another zone. If people are looking at building, let's say, a specific structure and they want to know how tall it can be and they're looking at multiple properties, that's a good reference for where to, maybe which property they would want to buy, because they'd see all the standards laid out before them.
I would say too that I found the color coding helpful. You may need a color or two that's in greater contrast with the other colors. That makes it all the more easy to find things.
I appreciate that. Are you talking about between the green and the blue?
Yes.
That they look very similar? I found that as well. So thank you. That's good feedback. And we'll have to talk to June about how we can add color to our our municipal code. I've used it as a tool for myself, though. I think it's really easy to look at a page and kind of see what could be allowed or not, but thank you for that feedback. Okay. And then, so I'm going to go back and go through that actual table in a second, but I just want to give you an overview of what's in this code cleanup first. Okay, so the next one is that special use standard. So this would be adding a new chapter to Title 17, where we would be moving things from certain areas in the code into this title to make it a little bit easier to reference the standards that we would apply when something's outright permitted but has to meet a certain standard. And a good example of that is our accessory dwelling units. So within the code, it says accessory dwelling units are outright permitted. But right now in our supplementary provisions chapter, there are certain standards that have to be met in order for you to be able to have an accessory dwelling unit. And that is that it's 900 square feet or 60% of the primary dwelling, whichever is smaller. There's information in there about utilities, et cetera, that are different than the underlying zone. So that's where we'd call out those uses that are sort of separate. Within that zone, I've also proposed adding some language that's really just missing right now. And that is in relation to the residential care homes and residential care facilities, and also temporary uses. So the reason for that, again, is sort of a central location for information rather than having these things dispersed throughout the code, either within the specific zone chapter or the supplementary provisions chapter. This allows us to sort of centralize location, have a centralized location for all of those special use standards. Okay, any questions on that one? And I think that will require some additional work on that table. If this is a direction you want to go in to keep that special use standard chapter, otherwise we can just sort of proceed as normal.
So that means that if you see the S on the first table, you need to go somewhere else to look for it.
That's right. So that would be the indication that not only does the next table of standards apply, but you may also have other standards that you need to meet in order to be approved.
So this is sort of a wondering out loud. So on the table, I don't know exactly where it is, but you are highlighting that a particular sort of construction is, what's it coded? It's coded permitted conditional use, and there are some asterisks by it. It's highlighted in purple, June, currently. And I guess I'm wondering why that wouldn't be a special versus what you had. When I was looking at that and was sort of like, this is sort of confusing. What is this? What is that?
Mhm.
So anyway,
I think that is a great point, and we could totally make that. And I went through many iterations of this table, and so I can pull back another one where I actually put probably an S in that one and said, check somewhere else. And just for the audience or other people who are unaware, we do have some zones where under certain scenarios or certain areas within that zone, something is outright permitted, and then in another area, it's conditional. So it's hard in a table to address that. So I think that might be the perfect place to, or perfect way without having too many asterisks in there, or too many confusing things to just have people reference a special use chapter. Or special standards or something. Thanks for that. Any other thoughts on special use chapter? No. Okay. So then the shoreland overlay zone is the next one. So currently residential uses are conditional uses in the shoreland overlay. We are proposing that residential uses become outright permitted uses. This is because of that clear and objective housing standard that we're required to follow. Not only do the standards have to be clear and objective, but the processes have to be clear and objective. We can't cause any unreasonable delay or time to an application. And so previously when we had, and just so you're aware, like the jetty is a really good area for where, or an example of where a house being built would be subject to a shoreland overlay provision. Prior to the change with the clear and objective standards, we did process them as full conditional uses. So the planning commission was hearing them. After that, we started processing them as type 2 decisions because we couldn't really create any sort of unreasonable cost or delay. But what we found in going through the sort of findings that people were preparing is that they're not really applicable because it has to be clear and objective. So our recommendation here is to just make everything outright permitted so that we're not sort of applying criteria that are irrelevant because they're unenforceable. Does that make sense?
what's the downside to doing that?
I mean, nothing, it's really just solidifying the process we're already going through, but it would be removing all notice to neighbors of any of the residential use on the jetty. That's really the big change. Right now, we process it as a type 2, so property owners within 100 feet are notified of the application for shoreland overlay, or sorry, a new structure in the shoreland overlay. And so by moving it to outright permitted, there would no longer be notification of property owners.
So the shoreland overlay, along with a lot of the other overlays, they're there for a reason, right? To I guess make us a little more cautious in terms of development in those particular areas. So does this make us less cautious because they're are some places we don't want development to happen, right?
Sure, I think not necessarily. So the beaches and dunes chapter covers the protection of the actual dunes out there. So that, I mean, to me, that's the area that we're really trying to protect, is the one that provides that sort of functionality. I think that the changes coming to the floodplain may sort of cover or provide that that regulation that you might be looking for. So I think, if I remember correctly, on the jetty, the shoreland overlay follows the floodplain, the boundary. So that would be, there's additional protections coming to that area, but we really can't apply the standards as they're written now. So I think the best course of action would be to going to this outright permitted, and then we can always review the standards in the shoreland overlay to add other clear and objective approval criteria if that's something that you felt like, or that the planning commission felt like they wanted to protect or further enhance in some way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that one? Okay, and then I'm going to quickly go to the next one. We did receive a request from a planning commissioner to, or a comment that I left the view line out. I said, see supplementary provisions, and then I didn't include making that change. So that was something that I included in your packet for tonight. Is the change to the supplementary provisions chapter, which would add that view line language. That's just a direct copy paste. I would also recommend changing the word should to shall. I think that that could be a way that we make it more clear and objective. So should, we've been told, is sort of like, well, you should, but you don't have to. But if you say shall, then it's a little bit more clear and objective. You might also move around the sentence, so not really changing, not changing the meaning of it, but it could say siting of structures shall minimize negative impact on the ocean views of existing structures on abutting lots by building new structures in line with other existing structures and not extending further out beyond the view line. Protection of views from vacant building sites shall also be taken into consideration. So the change there was really just moving one sentence up and then changing the shoulds to shall.
This doesn't clear up the whole issue with view lines, does it? This change? I mean, it's a lot more complicated, as I recall, than changing one word.
I
from
think,
should to shall.
I think there's probably, it probably doesn't clear it up altogether, but it makes it enforceable to, I think, the greatest extent that we can in a code cleanup. So just changing should to shall makes it a requirement that that you have to keep building new structures in line with other existing structures.
Don't we have that whole issue with, is it Strawberry Circle or Strawberry Drive?
Yeah, Strawberry Drive.
So we still have that issue, which would need to be dealt with because it's ambiguous, as I recall.
I think it's just more restrictive, most likely. Like the way that saying you shall, the issue with Strawberry Drive is that it's a circle.
Correct.
And so there was a desire from the people who lived on Strawberry Drive to make it more of an arc rather than a straight line. That was, I believe, the comments that we got the last time. If we leave it as it is now, it's likely that we can't enforce it at all. So it's a question to the planning commission. Does this feel like a code cleanup item? I know we pulled it out of a previous code cleanup, but what that did is just sort of leave it open for people to build out into those view lines because the policy as it's written now is not really enforceable. So I think it's a good conversation to have tonight, though, if this is a good enough Band-Aid until we can get it as an individual item.
So this is an enforceable Band-Aid.
I think so.
Stronger language.
A stronger link would give us a better chance at Luba, I think, of enforcement.
According to our municipal attorney, is that right?
She has not reviewed this one yet, but she's the one who said that should versus shall is one of those things that we need to work on and change.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wondered if it needed to say ocean or river views, because that's the language in CDR1 and CDR2.
Oh, thank you. That's a great point. Yes. So we can add that part in there. Any other questions about the view line? And I will also say it's possible, even if you pass this along to the city council, I believe they were the ones that last time took it out and wanted to deal with it separately. So it may not go anywhere, but it was just something that I thought we could fit in here as an easier fix. Okay. So now that we've sort of
Well-
gone, oh, go ahead.
I'll just make a comment.
Yeah.
I think to take it out and not have it in there with this code cleanup is not transparent to the people who it affects
Mhm.
and the property owners that it affects. So I think it would be a mistake to leave it out. And I will fully disclose that I'm affected by it.
I appreciate that. And I feel similarly as a staff person when I tell people that this is sort of like an unenforceable criteria for residential development. It doesn't feel ever fair to have something in our code that we would struggle to enforce. Because I think that we've always said that zoning or the code provisions are not only information for people coming to town, but they're also assurance to people living here that things are going to be built the way that our code says they're going to be built. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm gonna go through the tables. We did have a couple changes and I want to point those out for the record. So if you would start on page 13 of the reorganization. And I will just say a thank you to our newest commissioner who gave me a call and went through these, went through our table and held it up against our existing code to make sure that all of these were correct. And she found a few errors, which I am eternally grateful for. So the first one is in the CD3 zone, residential care home should be permitted. It was erroneously listed differently. The other thing to discuss is the automobile parking, public and off-street parking. That one I believe that was not listed in our current code and it was added into this code cleanup as an opportunity to just address off-street parking areas. So that's something I highlighted for you. You can keep it, you can change it, you can strike it out if you don't like it. It was just a way to again, address something that's sort of missing from the code. The other one would be that in the public park and recreation facilities would be not permitted in the light industrial zone in our current code. And then I highlighted the 4 asterisks on the permitted under natural resource zone. And that is, let me just find it. Oh, and that's where, okay, I gotta make sure I know these. That's where it says, okay, so the code says that public parks are allowed, but it also says in the next line, low intensity recreational uses which do not include the use of structures. So there was a question about if those two could be combined or if they are separate. And I think, and I'm trying to get in the brains of the people who wrote this code a long time ago, is a public park is just what it means, right? It would be a city park of some kind. And that the low intensity recreational use that doesn't fall under public park was likely the golf course. The only, there's only 2 areas in town that were zoned natural resources. And one of them is that Johnson Creek area. I'm guessing that's why it was written that way. And so then there was some discussion of, well, what's a high intensity recreational use? And should that be defined further to make it clear what it is we would or wouldn't allow and how it would be different than a public park? Any thoughts there?
My thought is yes, there ought to be a clarification about high intensity versus low intensity.
Hey, you can't talk from the audience,
That's right.
but that's good for public comment. We'll get.
The microphone here if you, at the appropriate time.
So I guess the question is, should those be combined? Should they be separate? How should that look in the code? And it sounds like there should be a distinction perhaps between public park and just a low intensity private use.
Well, I read it as they're separate now. It says public park and then it also says low
Yeah.
intensity. So right now they're separated.
And I guess the question is, should they continue to be separated? Or is there a different way to write it to allow both maybe within the same, if both are outright permitted, then is there a way to sort of combine them? I think because what we don't want to have is a bunch of uses where they're only allowed in one zone. And there are many separate uses that are only allowed in one zone, if that makes sense. That was part of our last code cleanup, was we tried to consolidate some of the uses.
And I don't know on whether they should be combined.
But I think you're right that they're separate. So I can, for now, just create another box and sort of separate those two out between a public park and then a low intensity recreational use, if that's what everyone would like. Any thoughts? And I can put that in the parking lot for discussion next time, give you some time to think it through and talk about it a little bit further. Another change, which I'm just realizing wasn't quite highlighted, or highlighted properly, was under museums, tourist information centers, and outdoor recreation centers. That is listed as a conditional use with an asterisk, and on the asterisk originally I had said something about had to be marine oriented, but really the reading of the code says that marine oriented parks and marine oriented outdoor recreation facilities would also be allowed in addition to museums and tourist information centers, specifically in that general commercial zone. So we did modify the language there on the bottom under the asterisks. And then I did add in the other uses conducted for public purposes, which was already listed in the public facility zone. So that is a conditional use in the public facility zone. And then if you turn the page to page 16, there's the wholesale building and contracting supplies and sales, including heavy equipment. And I believe that was actually something from the model code that wasn't addressed in our code. So I did add it in, but we do not have to keep it if it doesn't feel relevant. There was a note that was not in the existing code. And so I had listed it in this table as a conditional use in the light industrial zone as a sort of new use or new way of defining the use. So we'll put that one in the parking lot. You guys can think through that now that you know that that's not in there. And then I think on page 18.
Can you clarify that a little bit more?
Yeah. So this would be this is page 16 on uses allowed, commercial uses. One of the uses that I listed in the table was the wholesale building and contracting supplies sales, including heavy equipment. And it was pointed out to me that doesn't currently exist in our code.
So it'd be like a tractor dealership or something, or?
I think so, or just I think of like Bandon Supply or Hennick, something like that. Right, those would be building supplies and sales, or maybe some other maybe rental or sales place. So we can look at that one in greater detail. Does that help, Don?
All right.
Okay.
Well, so my question would be,
Yes.
you've got it right now permitted with conditional use in the heavy industrial? No.
That's the light industrial. It's a conditional use, and you're right. It looks like permitted in the general commercial. So I think it's kind of up to you if you would consider that to be more commercial retail sales and services or something that would fall under its own category.
Okay, we can look at that some more.
Okay. And then on page 18, the sales, service, or repair of machinery, trailers, mobile and manufactured homes, farm equipment, and marine equipment was listed as not permitted in the general commercial zone, but it is permitted. So I did change that, but I didn't change the background color on that one. So sorry, it's just highlighted. That one's not a big deal. And then
I'm thinking about that welding shop or a prefab fabricating shop on Rosa Road. Just before you leave the city limits. There's has a lot of steel.
Welding.
Hmm?
Yeah, you're saying it's like a welding
Yeah,
studio?
yeah, it's past Banning Supply on Rosa Road.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it, but.
It's just before you get to the cement plant.
So that's, I believe then that whole area is light
All
industrial.
right.
So it would fall under that either as we also have manufacturing, repairing, compounding, fabrication, processing, packing and storage. So I think it could also fall under that one. As long as it's conducted solely in an enclosed building and will not cause harm or result in a number of items. So those could also, we can move those to special use standards too, to have a few. I think that was a great point, Commissioner Norman, about moving some of these to the special use standards chapter. Okay, and then I'm just gonna go through a couple changes in the other tables. So then on page 24, the design feature of horizontal lap siding was missing. So that has been added back in, as well as correcting that in the CD3 zone, CDR1 and CDR2 zones, that you have to utilize 8 of those features with 4 integrated into the face of the home. And then another kind of, I think, interesting point that was brought up about the structure height is that under standard, there's really no standard for height in the heavy industrial or light industrial zone unless in the light industrial zone you're in a specific area. So I don't think that we have any height limit there, which feels like something that we might want to add. So just something to consider, that there were height standards for if you were within 150 feet of a residential zone, but not for any properties that would fall outside of that. And then the other thing to point out is that there's an exception in the current code in the general commercial zone for a height exception for chimneys and non-commercial antennas. So I can also put that in the parking lot is coming up with some sort of standard for height in the heavy or light industrial zones.
So did I read this correctly in the area of antennas, not chimneys, but antennas? So as long as it's non-commercial, it could be as high as 70 feet?
That's correct, and I believe that that's like that is like a federal rule. That is not a city law.
Okay.
I haven't gotten into it too much before, but we do have some passionate antenna people in town who have let me know that they have every right to put up their tall antennas. So I'm happy to get that info for you if you want it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And someone maybe more knowledgeable than me, hop in if you know anything about antennas.
This is really exciting, getting into the weeds like this, isn't it?
It's so fun. Okay, and then, like I said, nothing else changed in the rest of the chapter. I want to give everyone else an opportunity, though, if anything in that table seemed incorrect or there was something missing, please let me know. Okay. And then I'd like to go through, we did get a public comment, and I want to go through some of those items just to make sure that they're covered. I think the public comment was received at our previously scheduled public hearing that had to be canceled and moved to this meeting. So some of those were addressed between then and now. So there was a question about eliminating the aquaculture changes that we had just made, and I just apologize for those. That was an oversight, and those have been added back in here, both to the special use chapter and to those tables. There was a statement about prohibiting public and private parks in all zones, which they were in opposition to, and then allowing parking lots in most zones. So I think that's something that we said we would talk about a little bit more. We are going to change, if everyone wants to go the special use standard route, we'll change that, the table to address those. And again, we'll adopt that chapter that describes that in greater detail. There was a statement about eliminating the term service structures from public utilities, which was added to clarify the use. And I think the question to the planning planning commission is that necessary? Do you feel like service structures is already sort of evident as part of public utilities, or does that language need to stay? I have no problem keeping it. I thought the next one was very interesting. Laundromats are prohibited in the C2 zone, yet we have 3 within our community that are all located in the C2 zone. I think that when we made the change to how we defined commercial retail sales and services, that was sort of going to be lumped in there. And I was just looking at the code to remind myself. So this is on, we can look at it together. On page 16, so commercial retail sales and services are outright permitted in the C2 zone, but they are, but then self-service laundry is not permitted. And this is one of those, there was only one part of our code that specifically called out self-service laundry, which is, it's a conditional use in the C1, which is Old Town Commercial. And the way that our code reads is if something is explicitly listed in one code, so for example, self-serve laundry, then you cannot include it in the other code, for example, commercial retail sales and services. So because it's called out elsewhere, that means it's not part of commercial retail sales and services. So I think that's a very good point. And something for the planning commission to consider is, do you want to just put an asterisk on commercial retail sales and services and say, you know, except in Old Town where laundry is a conditional use or something like that? I think there's a way around that that can sort of cross out self-service laundry unless someone feels passionately that that should be defined differently than other commercial retail sales and services. You can think about that one.
Well, why the distinction? What is it about self-service laundry that?
Well, I couldn't get in the brains of the people who wrote the code originally, but my guess is that, or my recollection of when we went through this last time was that Old Town had some very specific uses that were going to be allowed or conditional or only, you know, only allowed under certain circumstances, because Old Town was meant to be more of a tourist commercial destination. And so it specifically doesn't allow some medical stuff, for example. So just, I think if I were getting in the brains of the people writing it, that was the reasoning for wanting that elsewhere.
Well, when we're talking about a self-service laundry, we're talking about a laundromat, right? Essentially.
Yes.
And so one of the concerns in zoning is, so it is a laundromat. Does it create any sort of unusual exhaust? Or, I mean, what distinguishes a self-service laundry, I guess, by zone? You've got people going in and out.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think,
But it doesn't create,
is it any different, you're saying, than any sort of other commercial retail sales and services?
doesn't create any more noise than a 7-Eleven, you know, it doesn't
No.
create any more exhaust.
Mm-hmm. And I'll remind you that if you make it permitted, so if you make it easier for someone to do something, we can do that as part of this code update. If you make it harder for someone to do something, we actually have to separate that out because that requires a separate kind of noticing. So just something to think about. But I think you're on the right track there with, is it any different than any other permitted use that would be allowed in Old Town? That's for the planning commission to decide. There was also a question about removing the residential uses accessory to other non-residential uses, which we did make a change to the code in the earlier. Let me get you a page on that one. So in the zoning district regulations, we did add in a standard for mixed use because the codes, the different codes sort of defined accessory residential uses differently. And so, oops, let me just remind myself where it is in here. Oh, sorry, it's in It's on page 12. So mixed use, uses allowed individually are also allowed in combination with one another in the same structure or on the same site, provided all applicable development standards and building code requirements are met. So the idea just gets to when there's buildings that have multiple uses within them, as long as all of their code provisions are met and both uses are outright permitted, they would both be allowed in the same structure or on the same site. I think that allows us to sort of cross out the different sections of the code that reflect residential uses being accessory to primary or outright permitted uses. Allows us to cross out the language that's different in every chapter and just adopt this instead. Are there questions about that one?
How about an example on that one? I'm having trouble wrapping my.
Sure. I wish I should have brought the existing code with me, but so in Old Town, the language in the outright permitted uses says residential uses that are accessory to outright or conditional existing commercial uses would be allowed. And then there's another zone where it lists that same sort of thing, but in using different language. So a good example would be in Eloro. Is it Eloro? There's an apartment upstairs. So that is a residential use that would be allowed on the same property as a commercial use. So the same could then be said of other zones that allow both residential and commercial uses. They could both occur in the same building or on the same site, which right now our code sometimes allows and sometimes doesn't, and uses different language when it allows it, which makes it kind of confusing. Does that help explain? Okay.
Thank you.
And then, let's see. Is there something else? There was a comment that it's, the code doesn't provide for the opportunity for a community aquatic center to be located within some or any zoning designations. I think this has come up in the past, either with you or maybe with the city council. But I think it can be considered a commercial retail sales or service. If you wanted to define it differently or explicitly, we could certainly add that into the code. So just an option. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Like, what's the language in here? Like public park and recreation facility, or I think there's another one in here. Trying to think if there's a different. Yeah, or outdoor recreation centers, that sort of thing. Oh, I think your mic's not on.
That would have implications for park.
Oh, or it's not working. Okay.
But it would then have an implication if the parks are not allowed in other zones.
That is correct. So just looking at it, public park and recreation facilities, if it were going to go under that sort of thing, would be, it's a conditional use in the R1 or R2 zone. It's a conditional use in the CD1 zone. It's outright permitted in the Old Town commercial, and then a conditional use in the C2 and C3 public facility, and then permitted in natural resources. And then museums or outdoor recreational centers would be conditional uses. And this is where we have to do some work to make sure it's on both sides here. In the, let's see. That would be the CD1 or CD2 zones, and then outright permitted in the C1 zone, conditional use in the C2, and then a conditional use in the light industrial. So I think it's up to the planning commission. I mean, this is one of those things where we have that similar use determination, where if you find that someone's asking for something and it can be considered a similar use to something that's in here, the planning commission just makes that decision at a public meeting. We did that with the arcade in Old Town.
So a public park or recreational facility, is that what it says in the code?
Yeah, it says public park and recreation facility, or the other one would be outdoor recreation center that I think it could fall under.
So Does the recreational facility, is that assuming that it's also publicly owned or could it be privately
I
owned?
think that is a very good point. I think the public part of it could make it more challenging, so. Something to
So
think
if,
about.
I mean, when I think about like an aquatic center, in my mind, that's a recreational facility. But it's probably privately owned, I'm guessing.
That's right.
So it would be the distinction between public and private.
I think so.
So do we need to add a private as a,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an option, or crossing out public. Does it matter if a park is public or not? I think that's what the other commenter was getting at. So you might allow time for public comment and we can always come back and discuss it afterwards.
So do we have, how many private parks do we have in the area?
None that I'm aware of.
Aha, that you're aware of.
You know, I'm thinking, I'm from the East Coast. There are a lot of private parks there because my mom loves to go to them. Where you pay money and you go to someone's house and you walk through their property.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think there are examples that we could pull for a park and rec facility that isn't necessarily public.
Right, well, the East Coast also has a lot of toll roads and we don't really want to
right.
go there, so.
Or the other thing I was just talking about was Goosey Night. You guys don't have Goosey Night around here, which is the night before Halloween where people are mischievous.
Oh,
Yeah.
they just hold it out, they wait for Halloween and then they do the mischievous. That's what they do here.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I've gone through everything in excruciating detail. So let me know if you have any questions right now, or if you want to take public comment and come back to some things.
so it sounds like we've still got a lot of loose ends here.
I think so. That's why I said you may feel comfortable passing along part of this and then continuing to work on another section of it. And don't feel obligated to do it all at once.
Any more comments? All right. Move on to public hearing or public comment. We will now move to public comment. This hearing is to be orderly and courteous. When it becomes your turn to testify, please state your name and address for the record, and you will be given 5 minutes to share your comments. Please be mindful of your time. Do we have any speakers? Nikki?
Oh, Sherry, you can talk first and then sign in after. But we just ask that people sign in so we can call them in the order in which they have arrived.
Okay. Good evening. I don't know if I can get through this in 5 minutes, so I'll go quickly. Couple of questions. I really want to start with that residential accessory to a commercial, because you kind of lost me there, and that does affect one of my property rights. So it clearly says that residential uses accessory to other non-residential conditional or permitted uses are not permitted. So where are you getting that mixed use with single family dwelling and commercial would be permitted? I'm confused.
Do you want me to answer?
Go ahead.
Yes.
So under chapter 17.12, under zoning district regulations, we added in, under 17.12.030 allowed uses, a section that says mixed use, and that section that I just read, where use is allowed individually. So if a zone allows outright or even conditionally residential and commercial, they can be used on the same site or in the same structure.
Okay, so from a building code standpoint, that kind of pushes it over into the live, work, sell.
Yeah.
So live, work, sell is not permitted in that zone.
I think, well, tell me if I got rid of it or not. I was trying to, I guess this is a question for the planning commission then as well. Is the live, work, sell necessary if you allow any sort of mixed use of the two of them together? You know, what's the difference if you would allow already outright in any zone that allows residential and commercial?
Okay. Aquaculture still appears twice, and it's listed non-permitted on one section and then permitted on another. So on page 15, it says not permitted in the HI zone. I believe that's a typo. And then the laundry, why do we need laundromats in Old Town? Wouldn't it be easier to just say it's not permitted in Old Town and permitted in the commercial zone where they're at now? Just a thought. Okay. Okay, so thank you for answering so many questions. I do think that the ordinance is not ready to adopt tonight. There's too many typos, there's too many questions. The general public hasn't had time to even review a side-by-side comparison. We created a chart so we could see what was being proposed, but the municipal, your website hasn't had the municipal code available for people to review. And I've had several people reach out to me over the last week who said they were going to be on Zoom, but no one's here. And then someone emailed me their public testimony and I don't see that in the packet either. So I'm a little concerned that maybe the general public is left out of the dark here. And so for tonight, I wanted to say, I really think this needs to go through the citizen involvement process. You know, your comprehensive plan states staff will hold informal, well-publicized educational workshops on proposed revisions to the comprehensive plan, land development regulations, and other planning topics that have potential widespread impact prior to a hearing. Workshops will be open to the public for participation and discussion. Questions and concerns will be conveyed to the decision-making bodies. But all of this that we're discussing was in a closed session work session. We weren't allowed to provide comment or give any feedback while you guys have been discussing this. So it's my opinion that this should not be approved until it goes back through edits and the general public knows what's going on. Thank you.
How many participants do we have on Zoom? Any? 2, thank you.
Any other persons wish to make public comment? All right. Are there any other commissioners who wish to ask questions? Or did you wish to ask a question? All right.
I just had a question. You said there's parts of it you think that are ready to adopt. Can you just outline what those are?
Absolutely. So in the packet provided to you, we did include a sort of draft ordinance, which included the architectural review overlay zone, the commercial design standards, and the off-street parking and loading as sort of ready to go. And then the rest of it, I think, I mean, I agree. I think it needs more time, more public hearing. I do want to apologize to our website, as we've talked about, is under construction. And so I know that we've had a lot of issues with the noticing and the municipal code not being up there. We did make sure that it is up there as of last week. But please, again, if anyone's having trouble accessing things, send me an email. I'm happy to work through and see what we can get up there. So I think that that's a totally valid concern and would suggest continuing the hearing for that particular item anyway.
All right. Any other comments?
Well, it's a comment not about this particular changes that are being proposed, but more about the website. So do we have any sort of an idea?
Can we hold
the
that off
general
until
public-
comments?
What's that?
Can we hold off until comments for the staff comments?
We could.
Okay, and just keep this moving on.
Yeah, I'd like to see the non-controversial, clear and objective changes moved to the city council, especially the parking issue, which has been lingering out there since last year.
Agree.
And I'd like to ask Sherry if she's okay with those. The non-grid part.
I don't think the changes have been transparent, so I don't think any decision should be made. I would request that you extend the hearing until the next regularly scheduled hearing.
So
We're all changing.
what would be accomplished in delaying that? What's going to happen between now and then?
The general public will have a time to read through the changes. I think it would be helpful if there was a clear draft that doesn't have a bunch of edits also. You know, like we had to specifically ask for this information. We were still going off of what you had in work session in May. So if Kadra and I've spent almost 40 hours on this, plus all of the comments we're getting from the general public, that's too much for a citizen who handles your code on a daily basis. That's a lot.
Well, hence my question about the website. Because of between now and then, now and next month, if the problems that are prohibiting the public to get on and see this material, if it's not corrected, then there really wouldn't be any, I mean, you could continue you could continue the hearing but probably not until next month, probably till next year.
Yeah, and I can make a clarification to our couple. The information that's on the website is all, it's in track changes, so anything that's red is new. And anything that's crossed out would be removed. The ordinance that's before you attached as attachment 1 is the city's code with that exact same thing where it says, where the bold is the new language and then crossed out is the removed language. And that has been on the city's website for months.
We had to ask for it. Nikki had to email it to us because it was not on your website.
It's been on the code cleanup project page for months.
Yes, your original May draft.
The ordinance that was drafted hasn't changed.
Okay,
With those
Again-
3 items, with the certificate of appropriateness, the commercial design standards and the parking,
there's
which
still
is all
many
I'm
edits.
asking them to continue on to the city council this evening.
Okay, so parking, the CO, the certificate of appropriateness, and what was the other one?
The commercial design standard.
Okay, what about the view line piece?
Yeah, that's not part of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Totally in agreement with you. Yeah, everything else would be continuing to discuss, but these 3 items have been out there in public for quite some time.
yeah, those 3 items. but
Yes,
not
that's all.
Everything else.
Yeah. Do you want to see what is in the ordinance if you haven't?
No, I've seen it,
Okay.
David. Like I said, we put in a lot of volunteer effort here. So I also wanted to comment as far as color coding, the zoning map is color coded. So that's, in our office, before this website had the municipal code on it, we had it printed, color coded, so we could just go to the zoning map and go, oh, pink or whatever. And it could be the same if you're gonna color code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's great feedback. So, yeah, again, I think it's up to you. You can totally continue the whole hearing. I know there's been a desire to just sort of move along those 3 items, the certificate of appropriateness, the commercial design standards, and the off-street parking and loading, and then leave everything else for future discussion.
I agree with Commissioner Fry. I would move on those 3 items, take a vote.
I agree.
Do we have a motion?
Yeah, and
Oh,
I
we
wish
have to
Shayla.
Close the
Yeah, I
hearing.
was gonna say, I wish Shayla was here, but I think you can close the hearing and then we can talk through what the motion looks like to just adopt or to recommend approval of just the things located in the attached ordinance. And then we can continue the hearing to consider the other item.
So then we have to leave the hearing open.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying is I think you can make a recommendation. You can close the hearing and you can only recommend these and then we can renotice for the other ones, or
Right.
you can, I think Shayla would tell me you can continue the hearing on specific items, but if you want to be safe, we can do that. We
Alright.
can close it.
So close the hearing and a record and I'll recommend a motion for what's being considered to be moved on to the city council.
So the motion usually says something like, I recommend approval of the ordinance as presented in the staff report, addressing the certificate of appropriateness, the commercial design standards, and the off-street parking and loading to the city council.
Can I just say I so move?
I think so.
Okay. I've done it before.
Second,
Motion and second. A verbal,
Sure.
roll call.
Commissioner Orsi,
Aye.
Commissioner Scobie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jerkowski.
Yes.
Commissioner Norman,
Yes.
Commissioner Frey,
yes.
Commissioner Pressler.
Yes.
Motion passed.
We'll bring the other items back to you. And we'll make sure that the website is working. I do apologize for those changes.
So should we open this public hearing again and?
No, I think we'll just renotice it to make it more clear for everybody what we're considering.
All right. All right, let's move on to discussions. Item 6, FEMA BIOP.
Yeah, so last month I provided you with a little bit of an update on the FEMA BIOP, which for those of you who weren't here, there's a change being made to the way that cities in Oregon that are affected, or that have rivers that have, salmon in them, the way that we apply our floodplain development ordinance. They've given cities until December 1st to make a choice on what is called a pre-implementation compliance measure. Those options are to adopt a model code, which I've put before you. We just got that yesterday at a workshop. The other option is to adopt a permit by permit assessment, or to do a temporary moratorium on all floodplain development. The city council has scheduled a work session on November 18th at 1:30 p.m. To learn a little bit more about these three options. And I'm just giving you a little bit of an update. The planning commission won't be involved in this initial pick 'em, I don't think, because of the tight timeline, but these are just interim measures before we have to make an actual decision. What I've been told by FEMA is that the model code is sort of what they're working towards as the long-term solution to this issue. And so although we can choose something else in between, that's probably the direction we'll have to go in the future. We'll be preparing a website page, if it works, to put out all of this information. And so please look for that in the coming days. Any questions about the FEMA BIOP that I can answer?
I'm just wondering how easy or reasonable you think we're going to be able to actually implement.
Oh, I think it's going to be very challenging. For a city of our size, we just don't have a lot of resources to be able to maybe assist people or also understand the implications of this ordinance or the permit by permit assessment approach the way that I think other bigger cities are. We do process quite a few floodplain development permits, so it's going to be a learning curve over the next couple of years. The feedback or the guidance that I've gotten from FEMA is that they understand that, and they want us to do the best that we can, but they'll also be available for some technical assistance once these requirements come into effect. So we will definitely be looking for that technical assistance and getting as much information as we can.
That's,
Oh yeah, and Nikki and I are attending workshops. We just attended one yesterday on both the model code application and the permit by permit approach, so we can learn more about how those, how we will be expected to apply them depending on which path the city council chooses to take. Any other question?
We've partnered with Lane County, I believe, in certain services they provide for us. Have they communicated anything on their thoughts on this? Are they going to be in a position, do they feel, to perhaps provide us assistance?
I think it's possible. That came up during the work session or workshop yesterday that we attended, was this sort of like, who's a qualified professional to both prepare these applications and then to review them. And so I did already speak with LCOG just to see if that was something they might be able to offer us. I believe there's also some other local planners in the area who may be looking to fill that role. In some just discussions that we had, it may be easier if one person learns how to process these permits versus every city or every staff person. So that may be a direction that we could take.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right,
Okay.
sea level rise.
So at our last meeting, I think because of the FEMA BIOP stuff, it came up, we were discussing sort of sea level rise and how that affects Bandon over time. I wanted to show you, and June's going to pull up the Coos County hazards map, which we have a link to on the city's website. They did do some mapping of sea level rise. I think it's coming into the screen. I asked her to just pull up the jetty as an example, because that's one area that's in the floodplain currently. If you, Nikki, will you click on, just kind of toggle through? The first one that she's going to click on is sea level rise by the year 2030. And so, all right, sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing from here. So you can see the affected areas. The dark purple is a 1% annual chance of coastal flooding.
That's
Oh.
Redmond Pond.
That's Redmond, yeah, that's right, that's Redmond Pond. And then the lighter purple is a 50% chance of annual coastal flooding. And then this boundary here is the current sort of like river. And then can you click that one off and click to the next one's 2050? Takes a second. And then same, this one, the darker color is the 1% chance, but you can see it's sort of growing a little bit in the 50%. But it doesn't change all that much. I mean, it's definitely affecting this area more. And then
That's on Jetty Road now.
it's on Jetty Road now. That's a good point. And then can you click on the 2100 is the real big one. So by then it really changes. And we could do the same with Old Town if you wanted to see that. Nikki, could you scroll over to Old Town and click through? And I bring this up only because I think it's important to, oh, we gave away the exciting part in the end. Or maybe that's not very exciting, but I think just to illustrate the changes that we can accept or expect in our floodplain over the next 100 years. So can you click back to the 2030 just so people can see what it's like more recently? Yeah, way less scary. And then of course gets a little bit more dire over time. This link is on our website, but I'm also happy to send it out to commissioners just so that you have it. There's some other really interesting resources on here. So this is the same map that we use for our hazard overlay zone. So it has the high or the landslide and liquefaction susceptibility. Those FEMA flood maps are on here. There's tsunami maps and beaches and dunes. So I can send that out to everyone just so that you can kind of toggle around and see for yourself how it might affect you or your friends or other people, and then pass along that information. Any questions?
Is there any benefit to printing those scenarios so the people could actually come and see a physical copy?
Yeah, absolutely. We can print them and have them available in our office for like the next month so that if anyone watched or listened to this meeting and wanted to check it out, we can make those available.
Might just be easier for some people to have.
I think so too. I also was, when I first looked at it, was like doing the toggle back and forth between all of them to see how different areas were affected. So I think it can be kind of interesting to have them printed and just see them side by side.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just the river, and I believe that's because of the question was that it only affects the from the river side and not from the ocean side. And I am not a scientist, so I won't say anything too much, but I think that's because of the jetty and the way that the dunes work, that when the water's coming in from the river, that's where everyone's affected. Otherwise, the ocean's more able to regulate itself. The river is less able, but if you are interested in that, we can always bring in our folks from DLCD who created these maps, who I'm sure would be happy to talk to us about sea level rise.
Might be interesting, not only for us, but for people in the community.
Yeah, okay, I will see if we can get them out here.
Maybe you could put a mention in the city manager's report
We could do that, city managers news.
that it's available.
Yes. Great idea. I think the one, this most recent one just went out, so it'll probably be happy December news. Check out sea level
Well,
rise.
You have to make copies first.
Yeah, that's right.
So according to this material, there's not any really appreciable difference until 2100, which is 76 years away,
That's right.
which means we wouldn't necessarily do anything different. Is
Yeah, it's a
that right?
free for all, right? Until
I mean, you know, all of the talk about sea level rise and climate change, et cetera, it's sort of flooding our senses.
Mhm.
Maybe not as much as it should, but it seems to me that, again, given this material, we don't even have to worry about it. Is that right? We can approve houses to be built
Well, I think,
down on the beach, and that won't be a problem.
I mean, it won't be a problem until 2100, so you can do future self problems. But I mean, I think that's where planning comes into play, right? The things that we do now, you might not see the effects of in your lifetime, but certainly by 2100, they're going to be apparent. So I think that when we're looking at the floodplain ordinance or just the impacts of developing in the floodplain, that's a good thing to keep in mind because any investment someone's making could be affected down the line. So.
I think it's fair information to share.
Yes.
Whatever they do with it, it's their choice, but
Yeah.
at least share it.
Yeah.
It's also, you should consider that we do not have typhoons on the west coast right now. But if the ocean keeps warming up, we could very well likely have typhoons on the west coast, which would then be hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen what damage hurricanes do.
That's correct. Yeah.
And you've got a river that's wide open. So something to consider.
Yeah, I think this is just kind of food for thought. I wanted you to be aware that these resources are out there and we can continue to have these discussions about sea level rise and floodplain development. I think I've also mentioned that we did get some grant funding to be able to update our beaches and dunes overlay. That's that area that's just really like right along the beach. And we can continue to have these conversations about how those areas are affected by both development and other environmental factors over time. So keep it as an agenda item.
All right. Any other comments? All right. The drone pamphlet.
All right, well, I might toss this one to Vice Chair Drukowski, but I'll tee you up in that we've had this conversation previously about our code does allow the city manager to approve any additional pamphlets that would be located in our vacation rental dwellings. There was a request at a previous planning commission meeting to have some sort of pamphlet about drone use near our beaches. And so Sally was able to procure this, and if you want to tell the rest of the commissioners about it.
Sure. I contacted the national level and the state level and the local level of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the local level is the entity that prepared the beautiful brochure that would give some education information to people who are staying here that may never have had any other prior knowledge of where drones are allowed to be used and in what conditions and what heights and everything. So I didn't know all this information myself. I would never have even attempted to do this. So it's the professionals that provided the information. The one thing that it does say in the bottom is launching or landing from a national wildlife refuge is prohibited. I guess that would be maybe important information for the people who actually lived closest to that to maybe like highlight it or, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
let the people know at their vacation rental that they would be.
There's no mention on the pamphlet though of the $10,000 fine and 5 years imprisonment.
Again, I didn't, I didn't produce this. I
mean, just because something's
requested it.
prohibited, so what? I mean, when you, for a local pamphlet, if you will, wouldn't you want to have some sort of, these are potential consequences?
I think that's up to you.
What's the reference here to the
The
to
CFR.
code?
Well, just has this, it's probably the statute.
Yeah, I mean, it's
That-
the CFR, which would be the federal regulation. I believe, so I was just talking to Sally about this earlier, that I don't think that I think this came up with people flying their drones from like the jetty or other city-owned areas. I do not think that there are, but I could be wrong, laws against flying a drone on city property. It's only when you're in that national
Right.
National Wildlife Refuge or the state
Or
park.
the new marine garden.
Yeah, the new marine garden. So I think that's where this pamphlet is more to be informational rather than punitive. I I think it's up to you. And we just need a consensus, like if this looks good, the city manager has approved it and we will send it out to Vacation Rentals. But I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything else that we wanted to add. So if you guys want to add something about,
Well, is Commissioner Jakowski satisfied with it?
I would like your opinions on it. I just felt like they were the ones with the knowledge and they, provided this for us. If you have something that you want to add, I never even considered doing that just because I felt they were the professionals.
I think it's good too that it has their phone numbers on it so that if anyone has questions like, how in trouble am I gonna get if I do this? They can call and ask.
Well, why don't we leave this as a first step and see what happens?
Yeah, send this one out.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. So as long as everyone feels good with that, we will go ahead.
All right,
Thanks, Sally.
You're welcome.
staff report.
All right, so my first thing on my list was the website, but I think you are all aware that we are continuing to have some website issues. Please notify me if there are links that are not working. June, our city recorder has been working on this website update and she would, I'm sure, love to be notified if things aren't working so that she can fix them or have the people preparing the website fix them. So please feel free to send me an email or June. We do try to fix things as they come up. I think there's still some issues with pending land use decisions that we're working through. And I just want to say I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we continue to go through that. I believe the last time I mentioned that we are continuing with our application for the Beach Loop Drive Pathway project. We did get some more concrete plans from our engineering firm, and we're hoping to make a project page on the city's website displaying those and letting people know that we are applying for that large grant. That's the Oregon Community Paths Grant for Beach Loop Drive pathway that would go from Madison Avenue down to Face Rock. The path is 10 feet wide with a 5-foot buffer strip, like a landscaping strip between that pathway and the street. So it'd be extra wide so people can bike and walk along there. That grant application opens on November 1st, and we will be looking for letters of support. So if you're an entity or an individual that's excited about this project, please contact me. We have our rares in the audience, Solon DeKrozik, and she is working on that update to the CCI, the way that we communicate with our citizens. She is going to be doing a survey coming up, and I would like to put and just general outreach to people about how they want to be communicated to. So if you see something coming from her or the planning department, please share it widely with your friends. This is really important information that we're trying to gather to make sure that people are aware and can be involved in our planning commission meetings. I am going to propose from here on out, now that she's sort of gotten comfortable here, that pretty much at every meeting we'll break into a CCI part of our meeting, and then Solon will present to you about what she's been working on, and it'll provide the opportunity to get that feedback from you if we're sort of going down the right path, and we'll continue to provide updates about the sort of outreach that we're doing. And then there was the question about that I received from Commissioner Frey about just sort of like a little bit more information about what geologic assessment reviews are. It does seem like we've seen a few more of them recently than we have in the past. So you'll notice on my planning department report, I always include how many applications we've gotten this year. And just in general on our pending land use decisions, you'll see those. So geologic assessment reviews are required on any new development where the property is subject to high or very high landslide or liquefaction susceptibility, and also for all properties along the ocean front. So anyone who sort of butts up against the ocean, they're subject to these requirements. And what we do is we approve that geologic assessment review before a zoning compliance application, which is like the building permit phase. And what happens is the applicant prepares a geotech report or some sort of geology report, has to be prepared by a qualified professional, which we define as someone with some sort of certification. We do allow the public or the person applying to determine what level of geoprofessional they need, because there are many different varieties of certifications out there. And they prepare a report. What we do is we check that report for conformance with our standards. So you don't have to be a geologist in order to review the report. You just have to know that they've sort of checked the boxes of making certain statements, saying that the report was prepared in conformance with certain design guides or manuals. And then including things such as erosion control measures, or any sort of physical mitigating measures that would need to be taken in order for the use to exist. We do have the applicant also sign what we call a hazard disclosure statement that just sort of says, I know that I am building something on a property that has a hazard, and I indemnify the city in some way. Because what we say is we're not really approving the geology, the validity of the geology report, because we're not qualified to do that. But we are saying that whatever that geologist said you had to do, you have to do. And we make sure throughout the process that they're doing that. At the end of all development, that engineer or geoprofessional has to provide a report of compliance with the city planning department, ensuring that any development happened in accordance with that plan. So that's sort of how that works and when it's applied. Does that help? Okay, that's the fast version. There's more to it than that, but and I'm happy to go through some of them sometime if that would be helpful for any of you. And then the only other question that Commissioner Frey also submitted was just about like who the emails are going to. And it helped me realize that when we got a new email system, the way that our emails to you also changed. It looks different. You used to see everyone's email addresses, and now it just comes to a group email. And so those emails are sent to all of the planning commissioners, and then myself and Nicolette, Shayla, and then Hui Radomski, who is our DLCD regional rep. So that just gets shared with us. But I'm sorry that the email changed and looked different, and I did not realize that. So I think hopefully that helps us not reply all in emails, so that's probably a pretty good thing. Are there any questions or anything else that I missed in the report that you'd like me to cover?
I know that I had spoken with you in regards to maybe the manager again, also putting in the newsletter about the letters you're requesting for help for the grant.
Yes, thank you for that reminder.
You're welcome.
Anything else? All right, thanks.
All right. We'll have commissioner comments.
For me.
No additional comments.
I just wanted to give a public thank you to Dana. She's been great. I've had so many questions trying to get up to speed before this meeting, and she's great about responding and giving me thorough information and resources to help. And so I just wanted to thank you.
And welcome again, the commission. Congratulations to Nikki on a deserved promotion. Thank you to everyone who participated tonight. I hope that people vote more diligently than they attend planning commission meetings. I'm very discouraged to see only 2 participants on Zoom. I think everyone knows when the planning commission meets. Everyone has access to the website, even though some of the links are wrong. The calendar is correct. I think the agenda goes out to everyone that the city has an email address with.
Mhm.
So I would encourage people that feel they're not being reached with communication to be sure the city has their email address on file so they can at least be reached that way. So encourage everyone you know to attend our meetings. As you can see, they're always fascinating and lots of information. Great way to learn about what's going on. Thank you.
Anything else?
I just want to publicly embarrass Nikki because I think she's so wonderful. We did promote her to planner one. That's what Bill is referencing. So Nikki did move up a little bit, and she's just a phenomenal coworker and a wonderful contributor to the planning department and our community. And I am so, so grateful that she stuck around for more than a year. So we just look forward to many more years with Nikki in our planning department. So thanks.
Okay, anything else? All right. This meeting's adjourned at 8:33.
I better go.